whether it be in the first minute or the 80th minute, if they've got speed, that can, if they can outpace the other winger, or they can run around someone with more speed, without a doubt, that can be exploited. Also, you've got to think, okay, if I've got more missed tackles than my opposition, I'm generally, I'm defending more, I have less chance to score points. Then missed tackles, if you miss a tackle, chances are there's a point scoring opportunity for them. In my opinion, I don't think the clubs look after the mental well-being aspect of the players too much. They're more focused on the performance aspect. They want to win games, they want to make money. Like, rugby is a business end of the day.
Okay, we're live. Jonathan, welcome back to the podcast, man.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for having me. It's good to be back. So,
yeah, good to be back. So, episode 14. For those who haven't listened to the first one, we had a little chat about a week and a half ago, and so I wanted to get you on because you just finished your master's thesis and talk about GPS data, point scoring, match outcomes in elite women's rugby league, which I guess isn't studied very often, and there is some interesting points there in relationship to men's rugby as well. So I thought it'd be great to get you on and just go on that. So maybe can you give the framework of your master's thesis to get started with?
Yeah, certainly. So, so my master's thesis, we looked to determine the technical skills and some GPS metrics that were the difference between successful and unsuccessful teams in women's rugby league. So we took a handful of technical performance indicators and we took a handful of GPS metrics from all the games. It was the National Rugby League Women's Competition, so in Australia and New Zealand.
How many teams are in there?
There's 4. So you've got the Brisbane Broncos, Sydney Roosters, St. George Illawarra Dragons, and the New Zealand Warriors. So they're affiliated with the actual NRL teams. And it's soon to be expanded. I think next year there might be another team coming in. So it's a small competition in terms of teams, but it's the top tier of women's rugby league in Australia and New Zealand. And so we took the data from the 2018 and 2019 competitions. So I think there was 16 games in total off the top of my head. I could be wrong. So apologize if I'm wrong. And then what we did is my stats guy was great. So he did all the stats for me. And we identified which metrics were significant to success. And then we also identified, what metrics we did predict points scored for each metric. So, for example, all running meters, which is a metric that the NRL looks at. It's not used from GPS. So it's in NRL, it's when you've got ball in hand and you're running towards opposition try line. That's all running meters. We worked out that for every 1 meter of all running meters equates to 0.022 points scored. So in easy terms, for every 1,000 meters you run with ball in hand, that's 22 points, right? So we were able to identify the technical performance indicators and the GPS metrics that predicted match scoring and match outcome in women's rugby league. So yeah, that's a broad goal. And yeah, it was interesting to see that there were differences between the research that has been done in men's rugby league and the research in women's rugby league. Men's rugby league, they're all naturally superhuman freaks, like their physical capacities are all the top 1%. And so what separates men's rugby league is more technical skills, whereas what we found in this, in the women's game, was there were some physical capacities that were differentiated between successful and unsuccessful teams. And that is more by Tim Gabbett's work in sub-elite rugby union, so semi-professional rugby union, rugby league, sub-elite rugby league in Australia in the Q Cup. It's more representative of the same standards of play. So elite women's rugby is more like semi-professional men's, whereas men's professional is at another level completely.
Interesting. Good. Maybe for the people listening, can we go a step back on all that? And because you've coached in both, so can you talk about the main differences that you would see on GPS data between league and union rugby?
Yeah, so I haven't coached them both, but I'm very well versed in the research that's come out.
Yeah.
In that league athletes are better athletes when it comes to running than rugby union athletes. Like that, they will cover more distance in total. They'll cover more total distance. They'll cover more distance at high speed. They'll cover more distance at sprint distance. So in terms of running athletes, they are better than rugby union athletes, and so their running requirements of the sport is more than rugby union. As for women's, I'm not actually too certain on the difference in GPS between women's rugby league and women's rugby union, so I can't comment on that.
No, that makes sense. I know you worked pretty closely when you were in Grenoble. You worked a lot with the speed. So do you have an idea in terms of union versus league? Is there a big difference in top speed in general between players?
From what I've been reading, the leagues are a little bit faster. I think there was one paper, I can't off the top of my head, I think they said union was 9.3 a back and a league was 9.7. But you know, we like that's one paper. Like we definitely know union players that have broken 10 meters per second, and we know leagues that probably can't break 9 meters per second. So it's all dependent. You know, there's lots of athletes out there that can cover distance at various speeds. So it's hard to say that leagues are faster than unions. It definitely depends on the athlete themselves.
And so from what you did with your paper, high speed running and sprinting did show up as significant metrics when it came to point scoring. So can we talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just quickly run through the metrics that we looked at. So we looked at and then touch on the significant ones. So we looked at 5 GPS metrics. So we had total distance, average speed in meters per second, high speed running, which was 12 kilometers an hour or 3.3 meters per second. So because these were female athletes, we lowered the threshold. And then sprint distance, which for us was 18 kilometers an hour or 5 meters per second. Again, female athletes, so we lowered the threshold compared to men's. And then we looked at the average sum of acceleration. So those were the 5 GPS metrics that we looked at. And then the technical performance indicators, we looked at all running meters. So again, that's ball and hand running towards opposition. We looked at tackles, we looked at missed tackles and tackle breaks. And so those 4 technical performance indicators have been studied in previous papers. And so that's why we selected those. And those ones we got off the website of NRL.com. So the GPS metrics we gathered from the clubs individually. And then the technical performance indicators we got online from NRL.com. And for those reasons, the GPS data we can actually analyze on a half-by-half basis, but the technical performance indicators we could only analyze on a full game. So unfortunately, we couldn't actually do a half-by-half analysis on those. So from those, we had 4 significant metrics. We had all run meters was the only technical performance metric. Then we had, so that's again, ball and hand running towards opposition try line. Then we had high speed running, so above 12 kilometers an hour, sprint distance above 18 kilometers, and then we had average accelerations. So something of note before I get onto the sprint distance and the high speed running, that the all running meters, high speed running and sprint distance were positively associated with match outcome, where we actually found that accelerations was negatively associated with match outcome. So that could maybe manifest itself. We're uncertain how that manifested unless we get the game tape and we actually analyze the moments that these occurred in the game and be like, okay, it happened to be the disparity. The reason that accelerations are associated negatively with point scoring is because this happened in a game. But we can only assume from the data that maybe it happened because you're accelerating off the defensive line. You then miss a tackle. You then have to get up and then accelerate after the opposition team who made a line break. So then all of a sudden you've got 13 players, or not 13, say you had 12 players accelerate off the line in defense. There's a line break now, you've got 11 players having to accelerate again, like twice, whereas the attacking team is just accelerated once, because they're still going forward.
Right.
That's why there might be a disparity between, that's why there's a negative correlation between accelerations and point scoring.
Yeah. So as an easy takeaway, maybe you could say that if you want to blitz, don't miss your fucking tackle.
Yeah, exactly. Like don't. Otherwise, you're just going to make work harder for yourself and your teammates. And then when game tape, when it comes down to watching the video on Monday, you're going to get called out for it. So definitely make your tackles. So you're back to the high speed running and the sprinting distance. Sprint speed. So in men's game and research done previously in the NRL and rugby league, high speed running and sprint distance does not determine successful and unsuccessful teams. It's technical factors such as tackles, all run meters, so forth. But in the female game, we found that the physical aspects of high speed running and sprinting can delineate between successful and unsuccessful teams, which highlights then the importance of actually having to train that capacity. So I've worked in female rugby union in the past with like National Rugby Sevens and the Wallaroos, and you can see that. And when those girls say go back to their club and they play at their club, they look like, I shouldn't say man amongst boys, they look like women amongst girls. So their physical capacity far outweighs those around them. And so you can see that again when they go to national level, say the Wallaroos girls and they play New Zealand, New Zealand again is that much better than them, and so they run rings around Australia. I love my Wallaroos girls, so if they're listening to this, I'm sorry for saying that, but it is the case. So it's very important to train speed, because if you can, it's a very trainable quality, and you can also recruit for it. So if you can train it and recruit for it, then you're nullifying the ability for, say, the opposition to have that advantage over you.
Would you say that? Would you say that there is? Oh, whoa! There's a bit of an echo here. Give me a sec.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Would you say that the disparity that we see at the maybe the lower levels of the game has been kind of equalized at the top, whereas all the, say, professional men's players have pretty much exploited their full potential when it comes to speed development, and as such, all teams have an equal roster of let's say developed speed, if that's a way to say it, but at the lower levels, speed has not been developed to its highest potential, and that's why it can still be a determining factor in the game. Do you think that's a valid way to think about it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, certainly there's players at the pro level who definitely haven't reached their potential of speed, whether that be because their position doesn't require it, so therefore they don't really train it, or whether they just haven't had the proper coaching yet, but their skill level has got them to that level. So there's definitely been pro players who I've worked with who've definitely increased a pace or two. But yeah, back to your point about once you're at the elite level, everyone's kind of on the similar playing field. 100%. When you go back to the, say, club level, amateur level, semi-pro level, it's an amateur game or semi-pro game. The boys that probably have taken their preparation seriously and look to develop those qualities, therefore have that advantage on the field, and therefore they can, whether it be in the first minute or the 80th minute, if they've got speed, that can, if they can outpace the other winger, or they can run around someone with more speed, without a doubt, that can be exploited at those levels. And I think that is just due to the potential that is there that they haven't, I guess, unlocked. So it is definitely worthwhile training those qualities in an amateur and semi-professional to, I guess, to squeeze the toothpaste tube dry, like squeeze it, because you've got lots in there that you can still improve on. So you definitely just want to squeeze that toothpaste tube dry.
You talked about scouting and recruiting for speed. From your experience, what are the best tests to assess speed? Is it on a fly 5, a fly 10, a stop start 30 or 40 meter? What is usually used, and what, from your point of view, is the best thing to use?
So it's definitely on a scale of gray. It's definitely not black and white. But if you had to say, okay, Jono, you die tomorrow and you can only pick one, I would probably, rugby, I'm probably going to choose rugby. I'd probably choose a 20 meter, because, we all know rugby is about acceleration, short, sharp accelerations, between 0 and 10 meters. But then, of course, you are going to have opportunities in the game where you can have more space in front of you. And I would say 40 meters doesn't really represent the game in total, unless you get like empty space in front of you or you intercepted it. And I would say 10 meters is not long enough. So I'd say, if you do 20 meters, you can get your first 10 meters so you can test your acceleration, and then you can get your next 20 meters to test. I guess you still should be accelerating to that phase, but you can test over 20 meters. And again, I choose that over, say, a 10 meter fly, because you'd probably have type 5 athletes, or the type, so your props and your second rows, who it's useless testing a 10 meter fly for them, because when are they ever going to use it? So again, if I have an option, I'd say 20 meters for the forwards and a 10 meter fly for the backs. But if I had to pick one, if you had my hands tied behind my back, because people love black and white, I would say a 20 meter.
Or you can just do both.
As well. Yeah, do both.
Do a stop start and a fly, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember seeing a paper from Ken Clark. I believe he did it on the combine. I don't know if you saw that, on the combine 40-yard dash. And there was a strong correlation between max velocity and acceleration profile. So essentially, the faster your max velocity, the better your acceleration profile throughout. Obviously, there were outliers, but it did follow as a trend. And so usually the guy who ran, 11 meters per second had a better acceleration than the guy who ran 10 meters per second. Right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's what Derek Hansen talks about, the speed reserve. So definitely it's worthwhile. Yeah, definitely worthwhile training.
And then would you go as far as assessing running mechanics when it comes to scouting, or is that something that can, what I'm trying to get at is, what is the hardest thing to improve? the technical aspect of the sprinting or the output aspect of the sprinting? As in, if you have somebody really fast but that looks like shit, would you rather pick them, or would you rather pick someone who doesn't run as fast but has cleaner mechanics and that maybe show more potential for improvement? If you had to pick between the two, what would be your
it would be tough. Okay, I'm just gonna, again, black and white. I would. It's not one or the other. Like it's, again, it comes down to like the skills they got. So we're not just picking someone based off their speed. Like, you know, are they a good team player? You know, do they fit the culture? Do they have their skills acquired? But say, for example, everything else equal, and we're looking at this. I would say the person that runs faster already, because you can clean up the technique. Like, both work. You could have a coach that's really good at coaching technique, and therefore, you know, that player goes to them and they'll get cleaned up and they won't lose a step. But you could go to a coach who doesn't coach technique and they lose a step. Likewise, you could have the athlete who already has great technique, and therefore you just need to put some more force into the ground, so your training will reflect that. So I guess it just comes down to, for me, everything else is equal. They were great people. They fit the culture. They have the skills required of them. I would probably pick the person that runs faster, because we can clean up their techers. Yeah, I think, mate. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how often during a season teams or athletes should test speed?
Oh, it's tough. It definitely, for me, historically, for myself, it wouldn't be about having standalone testing sessions. It would just be about incorporating it into the gym sessions. You know, such as whether we use speed gates or a radar 1080, sometimes just the GPS. Like, we did actually have speed gates. Like, we had speed gates and we had the new Vector 7s, and we put players through that, and we looked at the zone. There was so close between the two. So sometimes, you know, when we were training the non-match day squad the morning of the game, we wouldn't bother putting them through gates or putting them through, you know, on the 1080 or something. We would just we would look at their GPS and make sure that they were within that kind of 85% threshold. So it wouldn't be, we'd probably test in the beginning of the season just to get some real good data. And then through in-gym sessions or in speed sessions, we would just monitor them throughout the season.
Yeah, like you said, now with the technology that's available, you don't need to dedicate like a day of testing. You can literally see it as they're going through, like you said, with the GPS through your session. You could be like, okay, so this is what we're doing today, and we're actually going to have a look at the data, and that might give us an indicator as to how he's doing or how things are going, and if we need to do more, do less, etc.
Exactly.
So maybe to go a little bit deeper into that, what other things have you come to? What are the testing? We're getting a little bit aware of the main topic, but we'll come back.
That's right.
What are some of the metrics that you've stopped testing as standalone KPIs that you've kind of now looked through the training data as a whole, like the GPS for the speed, where you don't have to make to have those standalone tests anymore? You could just look at what's going on in training. Are there other KPIs that you can think of that you don't necessarily need standalone tests for anymore?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely getting them within that kind of 85% plus of their max velocity, individual max velocity, that we wouldn't test any more individually. We'd look at the data, whether that be them running through gates on, say, a contrast set on a lower body day, for example, or whether it be on the 1080 back at Grenoble, or, you know, you're getting.
When you say contrast set, what does that look like?
So it could be something as simple. So at Grenoble, it was, for example, we'd have half the team would start on, say, 1080, doing the various different distances, and they would do that, say, with it might be like a hamstring as well, so a hamstring accessory. So they've got it contrasted, and then the other half of the group was, say, doing their lower body strength lift with jump, and then they would switch. Not perfect. Never is, we know, but sometimes it actually have players that did their lower body strength lift first, and then it almost potentiated them. I know it's the buzzword and people don't really believe in potentiation, but sometimes it might have been mental or physical or placebo. You know, they did their lower body lift. Technically, then, oh, shit, you did a strength work, and now you're going to go do your speed work. You know, you shouldn't do that. But it somehow potentiated them, and they covered some great distances. So yeah, in relation to contrast, it's just, you know, we had a speed movement, and then we had an accessory lift, which, you know, could have been a hamstring ISO, could have been a single leg RDL, any of those kind of, we tend to do with the posterior chain movement. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess when people say you shouldn't do it, it's definitely clear that you shouldn't do like a fucking German volume 10 by 10 into a sprinting session. But if you're
Yeah.
careful about volume, and the guys are
Mm.
still pretty fresh coming out of their lifts, like you said, it's not ideal, but we have to deal with the reality of the field. And
Yeah.
if that's what you can do, and the guys don't get any injuries out of it, and we're careful with how we manage that, then we should be good, right?
Oh, exactly. Like there's many roads lead to Rome, and there's not one way to do things. And if it works it worked for us in Grenoble, so you can't say it's wrong. Like if someone might say, so you've got on Twitter, someone will tell you it's wrong, but fuck them. Like it's Twitter. Everyone's got an opinion. So yeah, for us, it worked for our situation. In our reality, it worked for us, and so we did it that way. And so yeah, it worked.
Well, you talked about the 1080. How did you work when it came to resisted sprints? Was it a percent decrement in max velocity, or how was that calculated usually when you added a resistance to someone's sprint?
Yeah. So it's been a while since I've been in Grenoble, but from memory, what we did is there was force velocity profile, and then we worked around that 50% force velocity for most athletes. And what we do is we would tend to ramp up. So we would say start at maybe at there. Some days we did descending, and some days we did ascending.
Okay.
I'm not. It was up to Benny and Patty. They discussed those things out when they want to do it. But for example, they would go 60%, 50%, 40% back to a 50%, or they would do like a 40%, 50%, 60% back to a 50%. And then that was tend to be towards the beginning of the week. So game day +2, game day +3. And then towards the back end of the week, we tend to do more speed, less resistance. So we tended to work again on the athletes. If they're a big athlete, we put them into weight brackets. So if you were under 80 kilos, we would put something like 5 kilos on you. If you're between 90, if you're between 80 and 90, you got like 7 kilos. If you're between 90 and 100, you got like 9 kilos. And then if you were like 100 plus, I think we put you on might have been 13 kilos. So that was the rationale we used. To be honest, I'm not too sure about why Ben and Pat chose that, but it seemed to work. So yeah, we early in the week we put more resistance on them, and then back in the week we have more of a speed focus. And depending on your weight depending on your body weight was which resistance we put onto you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thanks for covering. I want to circle back to your thesis. So talk about tackling and missed tackles. Can you talk about those and how they influence the results of the game?
Yeah. So that they weren't actually found to be significant, but they were found to be
maybe to dig a little bit deeper. What does significant mean? And then how do you determine if something is significant or not? Just so people understand what it means when you look at data and you say this is significant, this is not.
All right. So for us, significance means whether it was a significant factor in our case, winning and losing, or successful and unsuccessful teams. And then for us, we use, I guess, less than 0.05. So p-value of less than 0.05, which I think is the most common used in science, I believe, in research. And so if your value has a p-value of under 0.05, it's significant. And then if your p-value is over 0.05, it was insignificant to the outcome. And I guess one thing to understand, I guess, for people listening, is that if your value is under 0.05, it's significant. If say for example, your value is 0.04, it's significant. The exact same as if it was 0.00000. Just because it's 0.000 doesn't make it more significant or have more power or inference. It just means that it's significant. So we watched a cool thing that my stats guy did was he actually then looked at the relationship and the power of the significance, I guess, or so what he did was then he saw that they were significant, and then he determined, okay, well, what kind of significance do they have in terms of point scoring? And so we actually saw that. So, for example, high speed running and sprint distance were more significant, had more power inference in determining match outcome than all run meters. So, for example, the coefficient of all run meters was 0.022, which means for every 100 run meters you scored 2 points, whereas for every 1 meter of sprint distance was worth 5 points. So it goes to show you that sprinting is actually more influential in match outcome than was all running meters. So yeah, back to the tackling missed tackles not being significant. So that they weren't significant between winning and losing teams. But we did find that they had a negative relationship with match outcome, which is to be expected when you think that tackling and missed tackles is defensive possession. You're not in possession of the ball and you can't score points. Also, you've got to think, okay, if I've got more missed tackles than my opposition, I'm generally, I'm defending more, I have less chance to score points. Then missed tackles, if you miss a tackle, chances are there's a point scoring opportunity for them. So, they'll probably make some easy meters or they're going to score some points. So when you look at it in the context of the game, you can understand why that is negatively associated, because you don't have possession of the ball, you can't score, and the chances are when the opposition team is in possession, they have more chance of scoring. So and that aligns with previous research from the men's league game as well.
And so one could conclude that you need to spend more time owning the ball as a team. You need to be in possession offensively to win games, right?
Yeah, 100%. So from this research, we theorized that you want to maximize possession and attacking play, and then you want to train and develop speed qualities and recruit players with those qualities. And then defensively, you want to make sure that you make your tackles. Like if you are tackling, you want to make sure that you make your tackles and you don't miss. And then you also want to pressure the opposition into, say, coughing up possession. So you want to maximize your possession of the ball while minimizing the opposition's possession of the ball. Then you also want to work on your high speed running and your speed qualities.
And how, I guess we go a little more onto the technical side of things if talking about tackling, but for you, what are the biggest maybe the biggest holes in training when it comes to tackling training and technique? What are the things that you see are usually missing from the training? Is it the very basics? Is it really just head placement, thinking about all those things? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I guess so. This is my opinion. So I'm obviously being an SMC coach. I'm not a tackling coach. I was a scrum half, mate. So my tackle technique was not that good. I mean, it was good, but mate, yeah, no, I've been knocked out a couple of times. So obviously, it wasn't that good. So I guess in terms of from an SMC perspective, I think bone on bone we'd call it. So actually just having proper sessions, exposing yourself to contact and collision to get yourself ready for the game. So much like how we expose players to speed, we need to expose players to contact. And I from my experience here in France, we probably didn't do it enough. And speaking with the other SMC coaches too, we agreed that we don't do enough bone on bone. And therefore, we in training, if we didn't do much one week and we did a lot the next week, you'd see a lot of maybe like niggles around the shoulders, soft tissue, like corks, contusions, that kind of stuff. I think in terms of technical work now, if you've been watching like the top 14 in the Pro Tour, the coaches are just giving out cards. Like you'll see like 3-4 cards. Sorry, not coaches, referees. Referees are giving out cards, 3-4 a game. And 20 years ago, they would have been considered, it wouldn't have been a card, but nowadays it is obviously around player welfare. And, for example, last night, if you watched the La Rochelle-Montpellier game where Will Skelton got sent off for a red, it was 50-50. Like, yes, it was shoulder contact to the head, but what happened was his La Rochelle teammate came in low and chopped the guy, and the guy fell a lot faster than if he was going to use his own body weight and lowering himself. So all of a sudden, Will Skelton's lined up on this guy. And then this guy's body height just changes really quickly because his legs got taken out from him from the side. And so that's not really Will Skelton's fault. It's a red card, yes, because of contact was straight to the head. It's the letter of the law. But I think in terms of now training around contact, it's going to have to focus a lot more on the technique and making sure that you put yourself in positions where you're not going to be done from a yellow card or a red card. And I'm not a defensive coach, so I can't really comment on it. But it definitely, for me, you'd have to then look at maybe different ways to tackle. It might be like, hey, listen, guys, you've always been going one low, one high. But if that guy's falling now and you accidentally slip up, you could cost us a card. Then they might have to be like, okay, let's maybe look at I wouldn't say one low, one high, but let's try and lower our body height, and they might have to design some drills to encourage lowering of body height. But yeah, so definitely I think in terms of the technical aspect, needs to be approached differently now with the contact laws, and especially with the referees being a lot more strict around that, the head contact. It remains to be seen how coaches will apply that though. So yeah, it's be interesting to see over the next couple of years.
On the SNC side, what would be for you the safest or the best situations, because I mean, safe is all relative, the best situations to expose players to bone on bone in a controlled environment without making it a 15 on 15 all out kind of game?
Yeah. First, I'll just say go look at your YouTube and use your drills that you did with Andy, and definitely like that's the start. Definitely, like when you come in from off season and you're looking to do some tissue prep work, some mobility work, some shoulder, looking after the shoulders, especially for rugby athletes. I think that's a start. Then it might be if you have access to, like at the Reds, we had full body suits. And so some days, and over time we'd actually take them away. So, beginning of preseason, we'd have tops and bottom full body suits. And then we might then take away the bottoms, and then we might take away the tops. So it's a progression over time. And then in season, sometimes if we wanted to do extra contact work, we'd bring out the suits. So say, for example, we've done 5 minutes bone on bone, but at the end of the session, players wanted to do some extra work. We'd then say, okay, jump in the suits and do it. So I guess it's about progressively overloading them. At an amateur level, it's a bit more difficult because either the time that you have available, players rocking up one week and then not rocking up the next week, and therefore the loading is, it's not progressive. It can just be spiked, and I guess that's something that just has to be managed, and you need to encourage players to make training, or it's not like you can stop training for one player if you've got 30 amateurs. So it's a risk that they take by not rocking up to training and being exposed to that week in, week out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thought I had a couple of days ago that I wrote down for next season, if we even get to go back on a field of play.
2030.
Oh man, just thinking about it. So far we've done 2 whole preps and we've played like 4 games in like a year. So it's just thinking about doing another prep this winter and then not being able to play again for the third time for the third, half season is just so daunting. But I'm still trying to be positive and think about ways to improve things. One thing that we had a canceled game because of COVID in September, I believe. And we just did a first team versus second team game. And it was kind of it was an all out game. And our head coach took the refereeing, and he just tried to play everything quick and, penalties, 10 meters, always moving. And I feel like that really put us in a good spot. It really put us in the red from a physical standpoint, in a way that we hadn't really been put in, even with the conditioning work. It's really hard to design conditioning drills that are going to mimic exactly the demands of the game itself. Right. So just play the game. And I feel like we didn't do enough of that. Just play the game at the end of our prep. We did have friendly games, but they were against, kind of more rugged teams, more French teams that are slightly lower. Well, not the level that you evolved at. And so it's very rugged. It's very in the forwards. It's pretty slow. You don't get a lot of ball speed. And so when we got exposed to that 1v2 team, that really gassed everybody. And I feel like we needed to do more of that in the preseason in order to then just be fine when we hit the mark, right? So is there, going back to my previous questions, is there a safer way to expose guys to those kinds of full out demands without making it a full out 15 on 15?
Yeah, it's so, for example, there was one time I went and did some PD in Australia with the league team, and their head of high performance, it was their Thursday session before, say, a Saturday game, and that was their speed and quality session, but they did a live scrimmage where it was 70%. I'm like, how do you know the players are doing 70% and not 100%? And he's like, over time, they've developed it. So the players know what 70% is. They know how to wrap someone and take someone to ground at 70%. So it is something that at the pro level, maybe you can develop and the players are aware. You still get players, I'm sure you hear stories of the Franks brothers in New Zealand, or there's a player at Oval called Stefano Stella. Didn't know anything under 100%, right? So if you ran at him in a training drill, he was going to put you on your ass, right? You're going to get players like that no matter what. It's just about explaining to players, this is the intensity we want, and over time, they should get used to it. In terms of how that might look, for me, for example, we used back in Australia when I was working in amateur rugby, it was as simple as just doing, this week we're going to do 4 1 minute 15 versus 15 blocks. Next week we're going to do 4 1 minute 20 blocks. And the next week we're going to do 4 1 minute and 145. And then towards the end of preseason, what it looked like is we would have, say, okay, we've got a 2-minute block, 60-second rest, and we've got a 60-second block, 60-second rest. We've got a 90-second block. So we just changed the work rest ratios to what it would probably look like in a game. And that worked pretty well. And we did that at Grenoble too. Like some weeks we'd have, say, 6 reps of 15 versus 15 of various work rest ratios. And then in our higher weeks, we might do like 9, but they would be a little bit shorter, those ones. So it's all about just gradually over time exposing the players that way, and communicating to them like, listen guys, it's not 100, it's 70% or 80%. Like in terms of contact, still play at speed, still run fast and pass. Look to get a quick ball, but when you're going into contact, whether it be a maul or a ruck or tackle, and just be careful.
Yeah, that's super hard at the amateur level. From memory, we tried that when I was still playing 10 plus years ago, and it was always, okay, everybody, 70%, let's go easy. And the first one is like this massive like flying plank of a tackle, and then it's everybody at 100%. Nobody knows
100,
how to do 70%.
It's much more difficult to control.
It is, but I like the idea of setting work to rest blocks in the game itself. So essentially you're working with the sports coaches and saying, I'm holding the stopwatch, and when I whistle, stop, and when it's go, and we just kind of live by that. I think it's probably a good way to marry the two, but still have some, I guess, control on the volume and the intensity of the work that the guys put in a full out game, right?
Oh, it is, and with that as well, like we would like look at the team coming. The analysts would look at the team that we're playing. So, for example, we were playing Oyonnax, and they put, like, we both have artificial turf, and so we like to play quick. We're like, okay, cool, Oyonnax, love to play quick ball. So this week in our phases, we're going to play quick ball. Like, we don't want anything, say, under us S&Cs are like, okay, let's aim to have around 130, 140 meters per minute. The Oyonnax like to kick behind our line, so we're gonna kick behind the line, make them chase, run backwards, and so we would try and then we'd also, within that, we'd try and play our game plan against how we'd want to play against, say, for example, Oyonnax. So we would set the time limit, and we would set the kind of intensity, and then the technical coaches would come in and they'd be like, okay, this is how we're going to play our game plan, this is what Oyonnax do, and they'd try and replicate that within that session. And then again, if we played a slow team, like, so for example, we played Nevers, even though they kicked our ass, and they were very much a forward-based team. They got a great forward pack, and they're a bit slower. We'd probably be like, okay, the ball and play time for Nevers is probably averaged around a minute 30. So, like a max is about a minute 30 against Nevers. Average is maybe 50 seconds. So let's make our 50 seconds, and we're going to have a break. Then we're going to have a minute 30. Then we're going to have a break. Then we'll play like a minute. So depending on the team that we were going to play, we would alter our work rest ratios, and then we would alter our tactical performances within those games.
I'm always interested in things that should be measured but maybe are not. From the study that you did from your master's thesis, can you think of any metrics of the game that are maybe underappreciated, that should be looked at more? KPIs maybe that are not being considered strongly enough by coaches in general?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think looking at the data that's collected already, I think there's enough there that's being collected that we're probably not utilizing properly, whether it be as S&C coaches or schools coaches. I think in this age of technology, there's, back in Australia, like Channel 9 and Fox Sports do a lot of data collection. And then as S&Cs and as, I guess, sports scientists, we collect a lot of data too. And I don't think that there's anything that I would look to say collect. Because what we use right now, we probably aren't using well enough, maybe.
So maybe from the pool, from the actual pool of data that we are collecting, within that, what are some of the things that maybe are overlooked a little too much, in your opinion?
Man, that's a good question, to be honest. I think, because for me as an S&C, like the data that came out of this report to me just made sense to me, because I can see it in a game, and it makes sense to a lot of, it's like, if you have more possession of the ball, you're going to win. If you miss tackles, you're going to lose. If you're faster than the opposition, you've got more chance of winning. So I think in future, in the men's league research, they looked at more technical performance indicators, and then they actually did more kind of advanced analyses of looking at combining performance indicators, grouping performance indicators together, rather than looking at them in isolation, which is a limitation of the study. We looked at them in isolation. And then, so for example, they might look at all running meters mixed with, time in attacking possession. So they just group all these into performance indicators together.
Yeah.
And they look at it that way. So I think the future is definitely not looking at indicators in isolation, but rather looking at them collectively, and then also looking at contextual factors, and the environment and the team you're playing. So I don't think there's anything that we're missing. I think it's just our analysis techniques, which some people are doing. It's just this, we've been the first in Women's Rugby League, and we just wanted to do a real kind of basic outline. This is what we got. But future research should definitely look at looking at performance metrics and GPS metrics together, not in isolation, and then taking into account contextual factors. I think that's the route we need to go down. Rather than looking to add more metrics, we just need to change how we analyze them.
Interesting. So more holistic approach to data
100%.
analysis, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any closing thoughts on your master's thesis before we move on and talk about your PhD?
No, I mean, it was a good little bit. I definitely put it on hold coming over to France, but my supervisor was really nice in terms of letting me come over here, and I put it on hold for about 6 months. And then, the last 6 months I've had free pretty much has been great. So finish this off finally. So I'm happy it's done. And I think we're going to chat soon about the PhD, which I'm actually looking forward to more, because it's more on my alley right now. So I'm happy it's done. It's good, it's done, and move on.
Today's episode is sponsored by Strength Coach Network, the #1 education and networking platform for strength and conditioning coaches. Strength Coach Network offers over 200 hours of video education delivered by elite level presenters such as Dan Pfaff, Jada Mayo, Derek Hansen, Carl Dietz, and Buddy Morris. If you work with or want to work with team sport athletes and take your coaching to the next level, you will find everything you need to know on topics such as speed development, plyometric training, conditioning, rehab, program design, and much, much more. Strength Coach Network also allows you to interact with hundreds of coaches from all over the world, ranging from top NFL, NBA, and MLB coaches all the way to the grassroots level. You can ask questions, respond to popular threads, and get valuable insight from the best in the business. Strength Coach Network also covers career and business development tailored specifically for coaches. If you want a resume critique, need to get ready for an interview, or are looking for professional networking advice, go to strengthcoachnetwork.com/upside to get your first month at half price. That's strengthcoachnetwork.com/upside. Talk about the PhD. Let's go right into it. What are you looking to figure out with this, and how are you going to do it?
Yeah, so mate, PhD. Well, where to start? Okay, first off, so I never thought I'd do a PhD ever. Like 10 years ago, I did an agricultural degree at university, and that degree, man, was just 3 years of fucking passing subjects, drinking, playing rugby. I worked part-time as a personal trainer in my first degree for 3 years. I was doing an agricultural degree, and I worked as a personal trainer. It's like, how does that work? Like, you're working with beef cattle and you're being a personal trainer. And so I loved it. So man, my first degree was just literally get passing marks, drink, play rugby, work as a personal trainer. And so when I finished that degree, I was like, done, university's done. Anyway, a couple years down the track, I was working, and I realized that this is not what I wanted to do. I couldn't imagine being in the rat race for the rest of my life. So I went back to university and to become an S&C coach. And so it was during that time, for my whole entire undergrad, I really enjoyed it because I had great lecturers, great supervisor for my research project that I did in my undergrad. And then I was working like 30, 40 hours a week as a coach, then still like at about 2 to 3 different clubs during that time. And then along came my master's and the opportunity to do that in Australia. If you do a research degree in Australia, it's free. So I didn't have to pay for it. I wasn't going to do it because she came up to me, Claire Minahan, my supervisor, love her to bits. She came up to me and she said, oh, do you want to do your master's? I'm like, no, I've got like I've got like $60,000 worth of debt already. I don't want to be in debt more. She's like, no, it's free. Like if you do a research degree, it's free. I'm like, okay, so yeah, let's do this, because at the time I was working at the Reds, and I was thinking, okay, I think here touches on it a bit, like literally a master's degree kind of just gets you in the door, gets you top of the CV pile kind of thing, and just opens doors. And so I did my master's purely for that. I mean, I love working in sports and I enjoyed writing it. But then after when I did my master's, and I was like, this is it, I'm done. I'm not going to do a PhD. Or I did think to myself, if I do a PhD, it'll be like in 10, 15 years time, I'll do it embedded in a sports team so I can coach and do my PhD at the same time. And then, down the track, lecturing and teaching roles at university can be quite cushy. They pay really well and it's very good job security. So quite quite the opposite to the S&C realm. So the PhD came around, a couple of reasons why. So with COVID, I finished up at Grenoble, and the opportunity to try and find work in France in rugby was almost non-existent. Like a lot of teams were financially just very strapped, and they were reducing their workforce, they were reducing their squad size, they were reducing their coaches, and so the opportunity for me to get a job was difficult. And so then I thought to myself, okay, what can I do now? And in my head, I was like, well, I can keep looking for work, it's guaranteed. Or I'm like, okay, well, I can do my PhD, I'll bring it forward. And I was like to myself, what do I want to study? What can I see myself studying for 3 years and being passionate about? And I know everyone who's done research has always said, like, it's a roller coaster ride. There are days where you get out of bed and you're just super productive, and then there's days where you don't even open your laptop and you don't want to work at all. And so I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to do that for 3 years, what's something I can be passionate about? And when I think back to my coaching and what I like about coaching, I like that there's a human interaction. There's the actual learning about the human body and athletic development. And I thought, okay, where can I add value? Because there's so many good practitioners out there looking at, Alex Natira, power, you've got Jade Marin looking at, and his hamstring group. You've got the hamstring group in Australia as well. You've got, at Loughborough Uni, you've got Leeds Beckett. So you've got all these universities that are pumping out great quality research around the physical and physiology and the game movement demands. We're getting to what my PhD is, just like I'm building a story.
I love it.
And then, okay, what do I like is being a coach and the human interaction, hands down. Like, what I enjoy most? I love banter, I love people, I love working with people, and it's, for me, that was what I wanted to do. And so a couple of things. One, I went to Lausanne because my girlfriend is half Swiss, half French, and went to Lausanne, and Lausanne was a beautiful place. And I also visited GMO. Don't worry, beautiful mate. You live in paradise. I don't think many people know that.
It's pretty good.
And I went to Lausanne, and University of Lausanne is very well renowned in the sporting world. And I was fortunate enough that there's a scholarship between the Swiss government and the Australian government for PhDs. And so I applied for that scholarship, and so fingers crossed we'll get that. And then I went and I spoke to another reason why our lives are a little bit intertwined. My supervisor that I went and spoke to, by the name of Dr. Roberta Antonini Philippe, the wife of the man who coaches your team. So Patrice Philippe.
He's head of sports development. So he kind of oversees all the sports teams in the Neon Club where I coach at.
Yeah, and so you're with Patrice, and I'll be with his wife Roberta, and I sent her a message, and I said, listen, this is what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about people, and I'm passionate about helping people. And so my PhD will go more down the route of sports psychology, and I've developed my PhD in conjunction with Roberta. There's 2 parts to it. So the first part is looking at the coach, and we'll go into depth a bit more later, but the first part is the coach-athlete relationship, which is very important. Like, all of us know that relationships are key. The relationships that you have had with coaches in your past, relationships that you have with your athletes now, and then how that impacts the player mental well-being and performance. So in reference to rugby players here. And then part 2 is, from my time in France, I've noticed that there is a massive lack of support and player welfare offered to athletes, both Francophone and Anglophone. But with me being an Anglophone and English speaker, my research will focus on the support and tools that are given to the current crop of foreign athletes in France. So I'm being very lucky that Roberta knows the head of the French Federation Rugby, head of scientific research, so Michael Campo. So Michael Campo, whilst being the head of research at the French Federation Rugby, he's also the head of sports psychology and delivers all sports psychology to the French national teams. So that's the 15s, men's, women's, and 7s. So I'm really lucky that I've got a supervisor who is pretty much one of the world leaders in coach-athlete relationships and how to develop good coach-athlete relationships. And then I've got Michael Campo, who's the head of scientific research at the FFR and also the sports psychologist for the French national teams.
Not too bad.
No, man, it's worked out pretty well, to be honest. Like, when I was writing up my project proposal, and I was going, okay, where can I go? I was like, okay, like I love my girlfriend. I want to stay in Europe for a little bit longer. I'm not ready to go back to Australia. Where can I go? I'm like, okay, well, she's from Lausanne. There's University of Lausanne there. So I'm like, okay, cool. And then this opportunity came up to apply for a scholarship in the government. And I was like, oh, this is meant to be. I applied for it. sent my project proposal to UNIL. Roberta loved it, tweaked it a little bit so she could have a bit more say in it, for example. And then, we've come up with the project of being in 2 parts that we're looking at mental well-being and performance in rugby union athletes. And this is where it ties into you a little bit as well. So the elite aspect will be looking at the FFR, but then we're also going to be comparing it against the amateur level, which is in Switzerland. So we're looking at teams in Geneva, your team, Neon, potentially, and Lausanne. So we're going to not only look at the elite, but also the amateur level, and we'll look at the comparisons between the two. Specifically in the part 1, where we're looking to examine the coach-athlete relationship between and a chosen head coach and S&C coach. There, we could look at the skills coach as defense coach, but it was just too much. So we chose the head coach because he's numero uno, and then we chose the S&C coach because I'm an S&C coach, and we often have the most amount of contact time with the players. Before gym, in between sessions, on the field, after sessions, especially if you're being rehabbed, you spend a lot of time with the S&C coach. And so we want to identify, the different types of relationships that exist between coaches and athletes. An academy player might have a different relationship than a seasoned veteran with the head coach. For example, one might be more a teacher-student relationship, where the other is more like a peer-to-peer. And then we're looking at how these relationships impact the player mental well-being and performance. So for example, if you don't have a good working relationship with the head coach, or you have a disagreement, and then you might not get selected, and then you start going into a negative spiral, and then it impacts your performance and so forth. So we're looking to kind of identify what traits are, what classifies a positive relationship and what classifies a negative relationship. And then we look to then provide guidelines on how to manage those relationships and grow positive relationships for the benefit of the athlete, for the benefit of their mental well-being, and also the performance. Because in my opinion, I don't think the clubs look after the mental well-being aspect of the players too much. They're more focused on the performance aspect. They want to win games. They want to make money. Like, rugby is a business end of the day. Whereas for me as a coach, I actually, I'm not saying that all clubs like that, but I actually care about the players. And for me, I want to make sure that mentally they're being looked after, and if mentally they're being looked after, their performance takes care of itself, and therefore they can get another contract, they can make more money, and so forth. So, yeah.
Maybe let's try and write your internal biases section right now. Going into this research, what is your point of view on all of this? What affects the coach-athlete relationship? What are some good examples, some bad examples, and ways to remediate those?
By no means am I perfect. Like, it's
the bias section. You can say whatever you want.
Bias section. Yeah, just hoping. Okay. So for me, I'm a really relaxed kind of guy. I'm definitely not a dictator. I didn't play pro rugby. I'm not 55. I don't have a wealth of like winning teams knowledge behind me. And so for my approach as coach has to then be very different to the approach of, a guy who's played pro rugby, who's now, say, coached for 10, 15 years and has won championships. And the relationship that he has with players will be different to relationships that I have. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you definitely want to have coaches that have different skill sets and different emotional intelligence and the ability to connect with different players. And so for me, a positive relationship is about like having closeness. So, trust, respect, likability, whether you can work together, so your cohesion, and whether you can also have disagreements between one another, but constructive disagreements. Mm-hmm. And then your commitment to the relationship, like, just because you've had a disagreement doesn't mean all of a sudden you hate him. It's like, no, I respect this coach. I've worked with him before. I understand where he's coming from, but I'm not going to let it sour this relationship. I'm going to come back tomorrow and be fine. I guess it's a bit like having an actual relationship with your girlfriend or something like that. Like, you don't always agree on everything, but you go to bed, you kiss each other good night, and even if you're angry, and then you wake up in the morning and hope everything is all good. So so in terms of what makes the negative relationship, I guess it's a two-way street. You've got to listen first off. If I'm a coach, what I want to do first is like listen to the player. Like, if they're coming to me with an issue and I think I already have the answer for them and I don't even listen to what they're saying, then that's already a problem, because they're just going to be like, Jono's not even listening to me. He doesn't try to understand me. He doesn't want to give, he's giving me something that won't help. And therefore that's just negative for the relationship. So first of all, I want to listen to the athlete and listen to where they're coming from. And then after that, I want to work with them closely. Like, almost for me is, I'm not, because I'm not a dictator. I don't tell them it's black and white, it's my way or the highway. I'm an S&C coach, and I'm a young S&C coach, so I can't do that. So my approach would be I work with them closely, keep them involved in some of the decision-making processes. If there's a line that needs to be drawn, I can draw it. But yeah, again, my approach is more about casual, keeping the relationship likable, but also having the ability to turn it on and be serious, which I think some coaches can either be too serious to the point where they lose respect or likability because they're just seen as a dictator. And then some coaches are too lax, and they're afraid to ruin their image by being a taskmaster. And so it's just a balance between the two. Definitely you have to have the ability to be relatable and likable and respected, and then also have the ability to call it how it is and talk straight without hurting other people's feelings. So having that emotional intelligence to be able to to be honest without hurting the other person.
Yeah, almost wearing different hats at different moments, depending on what is needed. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess that part one of my PhD looks at that relationship side. And then the second part, which I know that we've spoken about a little bit, goes off my experience of being in France and the difficulties of that foreign athletes face in France, both professionally, so as a rugby player, and then personally, as that they face outside of work. So you might have faced this as well going to Canada, just, the different culture, the different organizational structures of living in Canada from Switzerland. But especially say for someone who goes to another country that can't speak the language, the challenges that they face. And so, the second part, we look to conduct interviews with the coaches and the foreign athletes to be like, okay, where are the shortcomings that you believe are that the clubs and the FFR fail to deliver, both for you professionally and personally, so such as help with family, because there are a lot. I know we'll probably chat on it soon, but there are definitely instances that people aren't aware on the outside where I feel the club and the athletes, I've spoken to plenty of athletes that share these views as well about the shortcomings and the lack of play welfare that's offered to foreign athletes.
Yeah, so maybe expand a little bit on that, because like you said, it's a very important topic, but it's not talked about a lot, a little bit taboo depending on who you talk to. So without naming names and pointing fingers, let's talk about that problem a little bit. How do you see it emerge, and what could potentially be done to not resolve it? Because that's always, it's never going to be perfect, but how can we improve that?
So so first of all athletes have the professional, whether you're francophone, anglophone, you have the performance stresses. So you need to perform to say, get your next contract, to get selected, so forth. You have stresses at home, in your personal life, whether that be with family, friends, marriage, that kind of stuff. But then we're foreign athletes, so have to deal with the additional stresses of organizational differences and cultural differences that include the language and the expectations between different cultures. So just going off professional expectations, athletes, the foreign players who come to France, they pretty much all agree that the level of French professionalism is low compared to their home, whether that be in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, over in the UK. So the professionalism exhibited, I think we spoke about it a little bit earlier on my podcast, on the podcast back in, where we said that it's definitely it's a bit of a cultural thing. Something as simple as, if you start before 9 o'clock and you finish after 3 o'clock, it's a long day here in France for the players. But, in another league, you could start as early as 7:30 and you don't finish till 5:30. That's not to say that doing those extra hours means you're putting in more work, but there is that fine balance of being around long enough that you can get quality work in, but also not just dragging it on for the sake of being there and from the player, both as coaches and as players. So that's number one is definitely the professionalism there. And then the language barrier. You don't realize how much you need your voice and the ability to communicate until it's kind of taken from you. So coaches who, I'm so jealous of you, mate, because you're bilingual. In fact, you can speak English and French, mate, it's great. But say coaches who go work in Japan in rugby, or coaches who go work in French rugby, not having that language, or athletes even not having that language to be able to communicate with other people, can be very isolating at times for athletes, because they can't express who they are, they can't express their thoughts or opinions, and they don't feel understood. And then there's also miscommunication, so you might not know what's going on. So the language barrier is really big there. And some clubs offer French lessons, and some clubs have scrapped them because of money issues. And for me, when in your contract, and for others, when your contract states that you need to take 2+ hours of compulsory French lessons a week, that will be given by the club, and that's scrapped. It's just like, shit, that is play welfare, because you're bringing in a player, you're promising X, Y, and Z, and it's not just the French lessons that they promise and they don't deliver on. You promise X, Y, and Z and you don't deliver on it. And for someone who's trying to, I guess, acclimatize to the French culture, Francophone culture, and they're not given the opportunity, or they're taking away like a massive opportunity for them to become part of to immerse themselves in the French culture, it's really difficult, especially when the language is if you've got an issue with the head coach and you can't communicate properly with the head coach, it definitely is really big for players who feel like they're being treated unfairly and they can't have that honest conversation that they would normally have back in an English-speaking country with the head coach about selection, about contracts, and they can't have that conversation. All their conversations have to go through their agent, and that you've got a French agent. If you have the thing about agents here in France is you can have an agent back home in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, but you need to have a French agent too, because you need to be registered with the FFR. Sometimes the French agents here, they don't care. Like if they want something from you, they'll expect it like that. But if you've got an issue from them, they can take a week to get back to you about it. So it's really like a long drawn out process of, if you're wanting to get clarity around, why you're not being selected, why your contract's not being renewed. It's a really kind of long process sometimes for those that say can't speak good enough French, or well enough level of French, should I say. Do you want me to keep going on some issues?
Keep going, man. Keep going. Let's talk about it.
So I guess the one noticed is the skill level of coaches here in France. I think Greg Laidlaw touched on it on the Arsenal High Performance podcast back in June or May when it was back in, and he touched on it here. And I've spoken to other coaches here in France too, both French and English, and they have noticed too that the level of coaching here in France is not at the same level as internationally. So SMC, why is SMC? Yes, is a bit closer to where we are in Western world, because you have to do if you want to work pro sports, you have to do your masters, you have to do your internships, and then you work your way up that way. So there's still certainly some things that French SNCs do that even they're just like, we just do it because the players did it in junior school and they love it, so we're just going to keep doing it. And it's like, okay. And then and this is more in relation to the skills coaches, and that there's a lot of skill coaches in the Western world, they have a teaching degree, or that they've gone back to university and they've done a sports coaching degree. Whereas here in France, there's no real kind of formal structure. You'll find that the French coaches here are either ex-players. It's not such a bad thing, but we know that just because you're a good ex-player doesn't mean you're going to make a good coach. You'll find that their mates, quite often they'll employ their mates. For example, because French clubs over here are owned by presidents and they're the ones with the money, they do the hiring, and they don't hire the best person all the time. They hire their friends, and that's breeds mediocrity. And then their relationship with the players, it's generally, from what I've been chatting with some other players, it's all about the French coach's way or the highway. Like from the players I've spoken to, they don't feel like their voice is heard if they've got an issue, or they have a thought that could contradict that of the head coach. The head coach just shuts down right away. He wants to be right the whole time. So there are some issues around being open and having a two-way communication street. And then again, leading back to the level of coaching, I'm not sure if it's got to do with the coaching education that's offered here in France, whether it's not offered, because I'm not Francophone, I can't comment on that's what's offered. I know the FFR sometimes does I get some emails that say, can't come learn this with us this week at Maxis or whatever it's called. But yeah, the quality of coaching here in France is generally lower than what others. And so so players come to France and they often feel like they stagnate and they don't grow as players. And you'll see after trainings that it's the foreign players and some of the Frenchies, I'm stereotyping a little bit, but it's the foreign players that stay out and they do the extras. It's the foreign players that want to get better, whereas some of the French players, I just once training's done, they just put them there, they go get a shower and they jump in their car and go home. And it's the same with the coaches too. Some of them, in terms of they rock up just on time and they leave the moment they need to. And here in France, another thing that adds to this is the contracts you can get. I'm not sure if it's the same as Switzerland, but you've got the CDI and the CDD. So you've got the contract, you've got the fixed term contract, so the CDD, which is 1-2 year contract, or you've got the CDI, which is a permanent contract. And in France, it's really hard to fire someone. If you've got a CDI, you're pretty much there for life. And so again, when you have that complacency, when your job is not threatened, you just become mediocre at what you do. You don't feel like you need to develop at all. And there are some coaches in French rugby that are on these contracts, and they've been there for 10, 15 years. And because they're on these contracts, if they get terminated, the club has to pay them out. And the club doesn't want to do this. So they just have the same coaches in the back office that offer nothing to the club. And that's taking up the paycheck of a coach, of a really good coach who could come in and change the fortunes of the team and really contribute to the team. And that's another aspect of that, I guess, is a French thing, is the CDI, and it's really hard to fire a coach if you're on a CDI contract.
Yes, it's almost like the system itself is not meant for absolute high performance and player welfare. It's meant to sustain itself as it is and obviously we're caricaturing here. There are some great coaches. There are some organizations that try to do right by the players and the coaches. But in a system that kind of promotes, like you said, not necessarily going to not scouting out the best coaches to put them in place, but financially it's more interesting to just keep the same coach that you've always had. And then that coach, like you said, if he's not incentivized to do the best job that he can for the club and for the players, plus you add the complexity of the foreign players coming to play a sport in a language that they don't know, and they're not helped in the integration process, it kind of breeds the environment is not right, and there's, but like you I guess described it really well, there are a lot of moving pieces. It's not the fault of the head coach or the fault of the player, or it's the whole ecosystem that's kind of not well adapted. So and obviously we're probably going a few steps ahead of your research here, but if you had to, go out on a limb, where do you start fixing something like that?
So I guess putting a finger out first, so my finger gets cut off and I'll put out my limb. So I had a really good relationship with the boys at my old club, and I've traveled in my time off in the last 6 months. I've traveled to a few other clubs and spoken to some foreign boys there about the issues that they face. And first off, the issue is that some clubs don't have a dedicated person for the foreigners at all. Like it's a front office staff member that can deal with any of their queries. Some of those staff members don't even speak English. So it's about, first off, having a staff member that is bilingual and can maybe educate the players initially on immersing themselves into the French culture. So whether that be about school system, if you've got kids, tax system, the healthcare system, and just educating the players on that, because the players arrive and they don't know any of that. They rely on other foreign players to educate them, the other foreign players and their families. Generally, it's the wives that talk and they unload on each other, and then all of a sudden find that the players don't care about it because the wives are looking after it. But there should be definitely an education kind of pack given to the players initially for them to help themselves immerse themselves in France, and that would probably be responsible at the club level. I'm not sure what the control that FFR has over that, again, because the clubs are all independent with presidents. But if there was some kind of obligation that FFR made for the clubs to have a certain standard that they need to meet to support the players, the foreign players, and also offer mental support, like whether it be a sports psychologist, because the clubs don't offer it at all. Like it's definitely something that is outsourced, whether you pay someone individually or you go to a sports psychology group. And even for the French players, I didn't hear of any of the French players having access to a sports psychologist at the club. So I definitely would initially look for the foreign players, develop within the club a staff member specific to look after them, whether any of their needs at all, because you've got to understand, like the foreign players, they get paid big bucks. Like Cheslin Colby's on big bucks. If he's unhappy and he's not performing, like that's pretty bad for Toulouse. So you definitely want to keep your foreign players well looked after. Then obviously, you're looking at the sports psychology aspect of things, and they can have someone they can talk to, about the issues at home. I was the S&C coach. It definitely wasn't my role, but I definitely was an ear to a few of the players about the issues back at home or what was going on. An example right now is we had Kiwi come over, and he had his son was in school. He came over at 9 years old, and he didn't speak any French. So you brought over your son who's 9 years old, and he goes into French school. And then his son was getting bullied because he couldn't speak French. And then one day his son hit this kid back. And so he got suspended from school. And there's the dad, his wife didn't have a car. He had the car because it was a rugby car from the club. He had to leave training quickly to go to school and pick up his kid and then take him home. And the coach got so angry because he did that. But here's a guy whose son is getting bullied because he can't speak the language. He has to go to the school. He can't speak with the headmaster because he doesn't speak French. So what happened was one of the players' wives, one of the other wives who has been in France for a bit, came and tried to interpret for him, and he had to take him home. And then you find out later that the district they're living in is the worst district or the worst quarter in town, and the school he's going to is the worst corner in town. So it's like, if you could educate that player before he arrived on schoolings, on what school to send your kid to, what district you can live in, French lessons as well. And if that club had someone that was dedicated to the foreign players, he could have taken that person, man or woman, and been like, can you please come with me and help me with my son at school? And that's what that person would be there for. So these are just ideas that I've spoken about, players spoken out with me over coffees, over internet, over Instagram. It's just been like, oh man, what are this? It's just ideas bouncing off each other. So right now it's all in the ideas phase. And hopefully through this PhD project, we can kind of build a framework that we can supply to the FFR and to the sporting clubs and be like, this is a minimum requirements that we think you should have for your players to support them mentally and physically. And then also support their, not also off the field, so with their families, like do they have access to an English-speaking doctor? Because again, one of the guys' wives was pregnant, couldn't get access to an English-speaking doctor, so one of the other wives had to come and join. And so it's just, they're really relying on that social community, that foreign community, which is great. Like, you love being one of the foreigners and having that community feel, but it's almost like if you're in a smaller team where there wasn't any foreigners who could do that for you, it would be so isolating to be pregnant and to go into a hospital and not being able to communicate with the doctor. So it's just things like that you don't think about. Like when I was in Australia, coming to France, I was like, mountains, wine, cheese, all this kind of stuff. And I'm sure the players are the same. They think, going to go down to the French Riviera, we're going to go to Rome for the weekend, Barcelona. And that's all well and good. But, 48 weeks of the year, it's not, the 4 weeks of the year that happens, it's great. But the other 48 weeks of the year, like, you're faced with everyday challenges in your life that are made that much harder by being in a foreign country, not speaking the language. So it's definitely something we hope to help the players with. No,
I'm really happy that you came on to talk about all that, because they're very important problems. And you articulated really well. It's a complex situation, but there might be some simple things that clubs can do, organizations can do in order to avoid a lot of those. And like you said, make the player's life a lot more enjoyable, because at the end of the day, if they have peace of mind that, the family is taken care of, the kids are fine, the wife is fine, and they're going to be able to, be in a sustainable environment, let's say, and keep living their passion and play their sport, they're gonna be very different players than the anxious ones and the ones that don't sleep and that just have problems on their mind day in and day out, and that's all that they can think about.
Oh, 100%. If we can look after them mentally, the physical aspect should take care of itself. So I'm looking forward to the project, and having the FFR, having Mikel Campo on the FFR side as well should hopefully give it a bit more weighting. And obviously Roberta and Mikel having that kind of Francophone culture will understand more the nuances of the culture itself, rather than me just being an Anglophone coming in saying, change this, change that. And they're like, well, technically that's not what we do here in France. So there'll be that French twist on it, which is definitely needed. Like, you can't come in as an outsider and hope to change everything. So having Roberta and Mikel as well on board is exciting.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I can't wait for you to, be able to do all that. Any closing thoughts for everybody watching, listening here?
Oh, mate, no. It's been good to get on and chat again. I'm obviously been back in Australia in quarantine currently, but being able to speak English again, like, and express myself has been pretty good, rather than being in France and sometimes just being like, I want to say a joke, but you can't say a joke because the moment's gone, and then you just like sit there quietly and idle. So no, it's I say just watch this space for the time being back in Australia and you've been a year and a half, so enjoy some time with friends and family and catch up with get my dog back. So I'm pretty excited about that. Get my dog back, and well, who knows? I could be back in Switzerland. Be back in Switzerland pretty soon for this PhD, maybe. So might have to say goodbye to him again. But no, it's good to be home.
Well, we'll definitely have to do the next podcast in person when you're in Switzerland. Knock on wood over here.
Yeah.
Big thank you to you for coming back on and talking about all your cool projects. Thanks for everybody watching and listening. Don't forget to check out our sponsor for today's show, Strength Coach Network /Upside, to get your 50% off your first month. And like Jono said, watch this space because there's more coming.